Ladies and gentlemen, I am joined alongside Carl Zwisler, a senior counsel for Lathrop GPM based out of Washington, D.C. He is a specialist in legal expertise throughout all angles of the franchising industry with over 40 years of experience. We are here to highlight the good work of not only his own practice, but the collective advancements that his whole organization has developed and set in motion. And we'll kick off our interview with Carl. As far as when you first got started into this particular industry, what is it that drew you into this field, and how did you really end up specializing in franchise law?
Well, unlike people who have the opportunity to get involved in franchise law today, I had never heard of franchise law, and I didn't know what a franchise was when I responded to an ad in the Washington Post that was placed by the International Franchise Association. They responded to my response, actually, and sent me a letter, and I looked at the letterhead and I saw a bunch of companies that I recognized: Pizza Hut, McDonald's, 7-Eleven, H&R Block, and so on. So I knew it was a fairly significant business, but I really didn't know what a franchise was. So I entered my first interview with that in mind, and quickly was told that don't worry about it, you'll figure it out in time. But the major issue that IFA and franchisors were confronting at that time was an antitrust issue dealing with tying laws. And there was a case that had just been decided that suggested that a franchisor could not impose purchase requirements on its franchisees. And of course, they do that to maintain the consistency of quality of the products and services that they sell, to achieve economies of scale and so on. So it was very important to franchising. So that's how I got into it. And the job that I applied for and actually was hired to do was to be the chief staff counsel, the first in-house lawyer for IFA. And in that job, I compiled the first book of all existing state franchise laws. We put out a newsletter every month explaining what the developments were in franchising. I monitored all of the proposed franchise regulation, then actually got involved in trying to affect the outcome of franchise regulation in about 31 states by the time I finished. But while I was there, the FTC franchise rule was developed, and so we had input into that. The Uniform Franchise Offering Circular Guidelines were developed, and that was the predecessor to what we now know today as the FTD. So it was quite an interesting time in the early days of franchise regulation.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have an absolute legend on our hands right here. We've got a lot of backstory going on, and it's very cool to be able to see, especially within this industry, how you've really been able to develop a lot of the different intricacies that we now see as just commonplace today. You've definitely had a big impact on furthering a lot of those details. And I want to lead into, as far as furthering the details into the present market that we currently have right now, as far as the legal hurdles that are currently facing the franchise industry, whether it be in the wake of the pandemic or even just in a changing business landscape. What do you feel like the biggest legal hurdles are in the current franchising industry?
Well, I'm going to put aside the pandemic because we all know that those are major challenges, and those are evolving on almost a daily basis. So some companies are doing well with that. IFA has played a tremendous role in helping the franchise community deal with these challenges, and they're going to be around for a while. But I think some of the other challenges that we're going to be seeing relate to proposals that are floating to change the FTC franchise disclosure rule. In November of last year, the FTC conducted hearings to determine whether the rule should be changed. And if it is changed, it's probably going to require more work on the part of franchisors and add more cost, even though they're trying to simplify it. So that's one challenge they're going to have. I think we all know that the joint employer issue is a major one affecting franchising. And for those who may not be familiar with it, that basically means that the franchisee's employees are deemed to be also the franchisor's employees. So if there's a violation of an employment or labor law by the franchisee, the franchisor is liable. If that happens, then the cost of dealing with these issues shifts to the franchisor, and the franchisee's discretion over operating their own business particularly with respect to their employees, would change. So that's a big challenge. The second one deals with the independent contractor proposed changes in Congress. The PRO Act is under consideration as we're speaking right now. And that could make many franchisees, as well as independent contractors who work for franchisees, employees and subject to wage and hour laws, workers' comp laws, certain tax laws, et cetera. So that's a major issue. So those are the major issues domestically. Internationally, we're seeing a resurgence of franchise regulation in different countries around the world. And one trend that I have seen in laws that have been adopted in the last year in Australia and the Netherlands, to be specific, try to rein in the discretion that a franchisor has over making changes to its franchise operational systems during the term of a franchise agreement. So under those laws and some others that are pending in other countries, a franchisor would not be able to require franchisees to invest in changes unless they have disclosed in advance, that is before they sign the franchise agreement, what changes might have to be made, how frequently they have to be made, and what the expense of making those changes would be. And for those of us who have just lived through the pandemic and all the adaptations that have been required to stay alive as well as thrive in this, we know these kind of changes are required. And personally, I don't see how a franchisor can reasonably be expected to anticipate what those changes are or what they're going to cost or when they're going to occur. So those are challenges I see right now.
It really is unbelievable to see as far as just the multifaceted details, like you mentioned, on the domestic and on the international front. There's always going to be something developing, and you've certainly had a front seat for it. But at the same time, there's always probably going to be a new wave of possible mistakes that come out of this, especially when the landscape continues to develop. That only means that people are going to have to be even more versed to keep up with the times. And as far as what you have seen in more of this modern or contemporary landscape, what are some of the more common mistakes that you have seen franchise brands in particular? What are some of the mistakes that you've seen them make from a legal perspective?
Well, whenever I would testify before IFA, on behalf of IFA before a regulatory agency, I would say, of course, franchisors don't make mistakes. But we know that that's not always true. And I think some common mistakes are relate to enforcing of standards. I think there are far too many franchisors who, while they may establish standards, don't consistently enforce them. And when they finally decide that they must take action against a franchisee for whatever reason, it's very difficult for them to bring down the hammer and make sure that the brand image is consistent throughout the country. That's one. I think international franchisors also don't fully realize the time and the cost that is necessary to roll out a successful franchise program. Excuse me. And sometimes they don't invest enough in development of their franchise documents, or they're really more concerned about closing a deal than making sure that they anticipate what might happen 5 or 10 years from now if something doesn't go right. And of course, my job as a franchise lawyer is to think of all those horrible things and trying to find a way to draft around them. And so there's a little conflict there, but that's one of the challenges I think that we see.
Sure, and I can only imagine that might be one of the more intriguing aspects of your job, being able to pinpoint these potential disasters, anyways, before they happen. And I can only imagine that's probably something that you can feel pretty enthusiastic about. Definitely assisting people before a crisis happens. You can really be the kind of person that leads them in the right direction. And as far as your other passions within the industry, what is it that you really do love? I guess on more of a personal level, what is it that you love about working with franchises?
Well, Justin, I think you led into it, because when you have, as I have, at least 40 years of experience in dealing with franchising issues, first of all, you never have all the experience that you need. There's always something new every day, and you have to roll with it. But you can anticipate a lot of problems, or you can see how they have played out in another franchise program in the past. So being able to bring to bear that knowledge, that you've acquired over a lot of years, bring together the resources that we've developed at our firm, Lathrop GPM. I mean, we keep on top of franchise legal developments every day. And we are looking at what's developing around the world and report to our clients and IFA about that. So that's important to know. But we also, because we work in so many different countries, we have prototype agreements that show the changes that we've had to make from one country to the next to the same form documents. And so just kind of being able to say, see, I know how to do that. We can help you with that. And we're not recreating the wheel for you. That gives me a great sense of satisfaction.
I think that's a very honorable way of looking at it. And especially when you talk about, you can't have enough experience, but you're going to work with what you know. And you've certainly proven over the course of your history that you're one of the guys that definitely knows what they're talking about in the changing landscape. And as far as one final question that we have for you, what is one final thing that you believe every prospective franchisee should know before they actually join a franchise brand?
That's a great question, and I've heard it asked many times. And in thinking that you might ask that during this interview, I came up with a different approach to it. And that is, I think it's important, if you're a prospective franchisee, or if you're getting into any business, that you write down what your expectations are. What do you personally expect to get out of this relationship with this franchise? So if you write it down, then it's fixed, and it's not wishy-washy. And then talk with the franchisor's representatives and with current franchisees and those who've left in the last year. They're all disclosed in the FDD, to find out if it's realistic for you to be able to achieve those expectations with this brand. And it's not something everybody does, but I think it would be very helpful and avoid a lot of problems down the road, to make sure that the franchisor's expectations and the franchisee's expectations are aligned.
We have some absolutely invaluable insights from one of the industry leaders. Once again, on behalf of our entire crew, I want to send a huge thank you to my friend Carl Zwisler, once again, Senior Counsel for Lathrop GPM, based out of Washington, D.C. Carl, my friend, thank you for your time. Keep doing your thing, and we will definitely be following you. Thanks again.
Thank you, Justin. Enjoyed it.